Hello out there, all you wonderful people. This is Andre, the game idea guy. Thank you once again. I started my spiel before it started live streaming. Hello there, everyone. Thank you once again for listening in. This is Andre, the game idea guy, and I am doing a Game of Thoughts live, doing a reaction to a reaction of a discussion that I had done. It was just a quick discussion about the Wii U being purposefully crippled. Um, and I did that just quickly trying to run over it because I was using Mass Effect 3 as my example when I was talking about it because it was mostly on my mind because I had been playing Mass Effect recently. So I figured, hey, I would do a discussion on Mass Effect 3 being crippled for the Wii U as an analog to a lot of the games that did get crippled on the system coming out. Now, a member of my Discord notified me that someone had done a brief reaction to my short video, and I got a chance to look at a little bit of their reaction. I didn't watch the whole thing through because I figured I'd do either a video or a stream giving my thoughts on what they had to say, and maybe even expanding upon some of the things that I was saying in the video because I did it in a short time constraint because the video was originally posted to TikTok and then I moved it over to YouTube as well. So it's on two different platforms. And TikTok's maximum is 3 minutes. So I didn't really go into a lot of detail, which I think I could do here now, which may expand upon why I was saying what I was saying versus just saying it. I mean, I've probably done multiple videos or discussions that have said different things that I probably may repeat here. Um, but that's just so that everybody has an understanding of where I'm coming from. This is not some sort of me trying to pick beef with the person, and they made it clear that they weren't trying to pick a beef with me. They were just reacting to what I was saying and giving their thoughts and ideas on what I had to say. So I'm about to share that video here. Well, that portion of their live stream here. Hopefully they're okay with it. I did leave them a message on Twitter to let them know that I am doing it, and I did try to make sure I tagged them in the video title here on YouTube because I wanted to make sure that they were notified I was doing it, and it's not something I'm trying to hide from them or keep from them. And I don't think that they could really find a way to tag me originally in it. Not that I really cared; it wasn't something I minded, but I am curious about how other people react to videos I make. So for me, it's interesting, which is why I kind of wanted to do it. And I think this is officially the first reaction that I'm actually getting that I will be able to react to. So that's also why I wanted to do it. It was kind of, again, because it's interesting to me. So let's get that queued up real quick so that everybody can see what I am reacting to. There we go. And I had to make sure that you guys could see it on my side of things. But we're going to go ahead and get it started. And I think they're just about to say.
You know what, though?
Yeah.
I do have another segment I want to do.
Yep, that's about to come up.
This is going to be a little different. I'm not going to be doing a video the way I normally would do on my main channel. This is going to go on the Necosaurus channel, so no fan art at the beginning. But it is going to be a video response nonetheless to a video that is entitled Random Gaming Thought, Was the Wii U Crippled on Purpose? I am actually curious with the ideas here because I love my Wii U. So let's see what we got.
A lot of people that owned them actually loved them. Okay, people, here's a random gaming thought, and this is coming because the Wii U trends at least once a month now, and has done so for at least, I think, the last 4 or 5 months. Oh, hold on. I got to pause this real quick, and the little man is waking up, so I will be right back in a moment. Okay, sorry for that. Wasn't expecting to have a little broadcasting partner show up to join me, but since he's awake, he gets to watch too, though he won't be able to hear anything. So let's continue. Finally looking into it. Hey, enjoy what you can with it.
It might also be that like every now and again, every month or so, we get a game that was locked on the Wii U that moves over to the Switch, whether it be like Bayonetta or Wonderful 101 or anything like that. Like when those games get ported over to the Switch, the Wii U does tend to be a mode of conversation again.
Okay, I do have to say something to that. Those games are older and were ported a while ago. This has been more recently happening up until recently, and everybody knows about the controversy with the eShops closing down. But this is just something that has been happening in general, and it's more so been because people have been complaining about the lack of features for the Nintendo Switch versus what the Wii U had. And honestly, a lot of those features are now useless on the Nintendo Wii U because Miiverse itself was integral to a lot of those different features, and Miiverse being shut down cut those things out. And even like the video messenger thing that you had on the Wii U is completely shut down. They don't even allow it to work anymore. So I think that has more to do with it than some of the games that come from the Wii U over to the Switch, because there are actually, and I just found this out recently, there are actually a lot of games that came out on the Wii U during the Switch's life that are not on the Switch currently. That may change, but just at the moment, it's not. So we'll continue. Um, but this makes me go back to thinking, because I've been playing Mass Effect Legendary Edition and playing through all of the games all over again with the DLC. And when I look back at the fact that Mass Effect 3 Special Edition was a launch title for the Wii U, and it was heavily crippled, even at launch.
Okay.
For just that individual game, it was heavily crippled. Let's not even include the fact that the first two games weren't available on the platform, so you couldn't get all of the context of all the situations to the series unless you played the other games actually at that time you could only play them on the 360. You could play the second one on the PS3, but that was about it. But you still lost a lot of context.
So hold on. I feel as though we've already kind of hit a gridlock here. So if and again, I'm not trying to sound like super like I'm going against somebody problematic. That's not what's happening here. Just a idea exchange,
Understandable.
basically. But if you can admit that Mass Effect 2 came out on PS3 but not 1 at that time, then it seems to me more that EA just didn't want to do the port job for 1 and 2, putting them and this has been an issue with the Mass Effect series for a while. Like, there are only a handful of places where you can play all 3 Mass Effect games without issue, at least during the Wii U era, because Mass Effect, like, as they were pulling 3 in, didn't they just end up throwing that on Origin instead of letting us grab it on Steam, or didn't they end up pulling it from Steam at one point as well?
Yes, that is
Like,
true.
that series in general has a really weird history with having fragmented releases. But Mass Effect 2, Mass Effect 3 both made it to PS3, but Mass Effect 1 didn't make it there. Then would that mean that the PS3 version was trying to be crippled as well?
I would agree with this statement if it weren't for the fact that shortly after the Mass Effect 3 Special Edition came out on the Wii U, the Mass Effect trilogy got re-released for the Xbox 360, and then it was also released for the PS3, giving Mass Effect 1 to PS3 owners at the time. And it also came out on PC. Like, I think this was within 2 weeks of Mass Effect 3 Special Edition coming out on the Wii U. I may be wrong on the exact amount of time, but I know it wasn't too long after, and that was the big issue. That was the major issue that a lot of people had when it came down to the Wii U version of the game, because it did have some very nice features that utilized the gamepad really well, but then you just lost everything else that made the game what it was. It's kind of like losing part of the identity of the series, because you only want to stick to one iteration of the game on there, knowing that it is a story-driven series and all parts of it are important. And that was the major issue when it came down, at least to EA, with Mass Effect. Now, stuff like this has happened with other games. For example, like Arkham Origin on the Wii U had the multiplayer mode removed. There was no reason that it couldn't have been there, but it was removed. And versus Arkham City Armored Edition, Arkham Origins had almost literally all of the features for the Wii U gamepad completely ignored, like just not at all placed there. So it wasn't something that was strictly EA or just strictly Mass Effect, but in this example, that was what I was working with. I didn't want to overcomplicate it by talking about multiple different games in a very short amount of time. So that's why it stuck out to me, and that's why I had to talk about it in that manner, because I didn't want to go overboard talking about, well, this company here did this and that company there did that. I just kind of wanted to focus on what was most easily notable for people to be able to see. And then if someone was interested, they could potentially start researching into it on their own. Because if you look at the lineup of stuff with the Wii U, a lot of stuff happened. Like, we got word from Square Enix that the Wii U version of Deus Ex Human Revolution Director's Cut was held back to have parity with the Xbox 360 and PS3. It could have looked better and run better, but they didn't want to put the time into it. Or the situation with Rayman Legends, where it was completed and ready to go for the Wii U, but then Ubisoft decided that they were going to hold it back until versions of the game for the PS3 and 360 were ready to go, when they should have just released the Wii U version of the game and then just later ported it to the other platforms. And even the developers were ticked off about that. Or even going back to Ubisoft again with Watch Dogs. That game got delayed on the Wii U for no reason, because it was, from what we've heard before, it was complete. It was complete when the other versions were complete, or at least shortly thereafter. And it was held back on the promise of there being additional features and put into the game for the gamepad, and nothing was done with it. And then the game was released around the same time Smash 4 released for Wii U. There was not going to be much of a choice between people picking up a game that, again, other platforms have already gotten and has been on the market and more likely already played, and then it didn't really enhance anything, it didn't add anything to it. Nobody was going to pick it up. So you can look at it from the perspective that, hey, maybe they just were trying to play it safe. But at the same time, when the PS3 was early on in its life and it was selling horribly, third-party developers were putting their all into making the games as good as possible when they were putting it on that platform, even with as expensive as the PS3 was. And it was a highly expensive console at the time. And it only ended up evening out much later on, after everybody got used to working with the way the PS3 worked. And even then, some games were still inferior to how the 360 worked, because the 360's memory bandwidth was more open versus how the PS3's was. But let me not get too dragged on into that. There's still more to this discussion to be had. And I don't think I got past this one. I think I stopped right here.
I don't know. Like, at the end of the day, Mass Effect, what EA did with Mass Effect is not necessarily reflective of what Nintendo wants for their system as a whole, because EA is not a first-party developer.
No, they're not a first-party developer, but they were supposedly in a unprecedented partnership with Nintendo and not churning out any worthwhile games. I mean, granted, yeah, they did put some effort into a few of the different games, like the Madden that came out on the Wii U originally. It had some features in there that were not available to other platforms. But then they stopped putting Madden on the Wii U, and then the Need for Speed that came out. I will give it to them. The team that worked on that really tried. Crisis 3 was supposed to come out on the Wii U, and it was said that it was running beautifully on the platform, and then it got ignored and canceled. So while they're not the first party, their actions affected the console. Now, look at the flip side, where the Switch is getting a lot of games that people would have otherwise said wouldn't be coming to the platform, and it's garnering a lot of attention and is doing very well from third-party developers. That's kind of how you have to look at it with the Wii U until it's basically the same type of situation, but in reverse. Plus, if people remember E3 2011, where EA came out with Nintendo to talk about the Wii U. They were praising the machine. They were gloating over it and how it was going to be big for the forward movement of the game industry. And then the following year, not even completely a year after that, they're bashing it before it's even released. And I would say that's probably because they got word of what was going to be coming down with Microsoft and Sony to be known as the PS4 and Xbox One. They probably had word and were working on partnerships with them that they thought would be more lucrative for them. And now we come down to it, and EA is bleeding money like a lot of other companies because they decided that they wanted to be stringent about how they worked with putting their games across platforms. So at least that's how I see it. I mean, there's always a counter argument or counter evidence, but it depends on what has more weight to their current situation.
They're a third-party developer.
Because you couldn't do everything, and then there were just some events that couldn't happen because there was no buildup from the prior games to make that available. This game launched with the From Ashes DLC as well as the extended content that was added in when everybody got upset about the way the endings were.
Okay.
So the game launched crippled. And there was a second DLC that came out before this game launched that was never made available on the Wii U. And then there was 2 other DLCs that were never made available for the Wii U version of this game.
So I am going to pause for a second because I need to point something out. This has been an issue on Nintendo consoles for a very long time. Having gimped versions or smaller versions of games that exist in more expanded forms on other consoles. Resident Evil 4, for example, never got an expanded version on the GameCube, despite it being its launch platform. But the PS2 version of the game ended up having more content.
Okay, my counter argument to that is that the PS2 version of the game ran more poorly and it was given the additional content because the hardware wasn't capable of running it the same way as the GameCube. You could apply that logic also to Beautiful Joe. But here's the problem. The Wii U hardware was better than both the PS3 and the 360, which got all of that content. That's the bigger argument here. Like, why is it that the machine that has the better hardware is purposefully for a game that is coming out around the same time as a trilogy version of it, and then their DLC, which could have easily been repurposed from the 360 and ported over to the Wii U because of how the hardware to the Wii U was very similar to that of the Xbox 360. Why couldn't they do it? It wouldn't have cost them that much money to do it, and it would have at least if they did that, people would have been more interested in that version of Mass Effect 3 and seeing how things would work with the gamepad and how the game would play. But the issue came down to they just decided that they weren't going to give that option to the players for the Wii U. Now, a lot of people use multiple different reasons, like, storage. Even though at the time you could just plug in an external hard drive to the Wii U and it didn't make much of a difference. And it didn't matter which version of the Wii U it was. You could do it with the 8 gigabyte basic model or the 32 gigabyte deluxe. Either one of them worked with external hard drives up to 2 terabytes. So again, I get that it happened, but why does that make it right? But then that would also be why I would make the argument, like, and I'll go back to Watch Dogs again here, when Ubisoft held back the PC version of Watch Dogs to have parity with the console versions. Why do you have to do that? Why not let the platform shine as best as it can and use all of the features to it to make the game be as best as it can on that particular platform? You want people to be interested in the software. You want them to be interested in the IP, but then that means you also have to pay respect to. Okay, little man. You also have to pay respect to the fan base that would be getting. I'm using the wrong words here. You have to pay respect to the fan base that would be getting involved with the game, because if the fan base isn't interested in the product because they realize that the product is gimped. Do you blame the fan base for not buying it, or do you blame the company for gimping it?
The Wii in general, the Wii version of Modern
Okay, the Wii
Warfare.
was way more hardware deficient than the other platforms. That's not the same issue with the Wii U. And the Wii was way more hardware deficient than the 360 and PS3, as opposed to how hardware deficient the Wii U was compared to the Xbox One and the PS4. There were workarounds for a lot of stuff if the companies took the time to do it. And hey, they found a reason to put the stuff on the Wii, just like they're finding reasons to put games on the Switch that they said couldn't run on the Switch. If it sells well enough, that means there's a big enough fan base, and that big enough fan base encourages those sales. And a lot of third-party games did well on the Wii, and a lot of third-party games are doing well on the Switch. They're making more than their money back on the platform, and that's the point. The thing is, though, that started early on with the Wii U when there was no viable outward reason for it. At least, let me pick this up. At least that's my point. There was no viable reason for it other than, hey, we don't want this to be successful.
World at War, Call of Duty 3, all of these versions of those games were severely gimped compared to their counterparts. Modern Warfare wasn't as bad because it had the liberty of coming out several years after the original Modern Warfare release. But even when we got Call of Duty Black Ops on the Wii, like Black Ops Zombies only ever had one map on the Wii. None of the DLC that was available on the other consoles made it over to the Wii version of that game, despite us having an identical campaign.
And the Wii version of that game, the Wii console itself did not have the expanded storage that the Wii U had. So I could agree as to why they wouldn't have done it, because there was just not enough room for them to be able to put it on there and guarantee that everyone could get it. So that I can understand in that case. But when it comes down to the Wii U and the console has expandable storage, which oddly enough, a lot of people argued against. But then when the PS3 came out with a 500 gigabyte hard drive and then mandatory installs, people didn't argue about it until after they got to the point where their memory was full and they couldn't put anything else in there. So then it became, hey, we need expandable storage. We need expandable storage, which was something the Wii U did from jump with a day one patch to the firmware. So, yeah, I do agree that those versions of those games were gimped, but that was definitely more a hardware reason at the time. There's no hardware reason that a game that's running on the 360 can't run well on the Wii U, on the 360 or the PS3. That comes down to coding and the patience of the developers, or in this case, maybe even the patience of the publishers versus the developers, because some of the developers wanted to make games for the Wii U and their publishers didn't want them to. Like, take, for instance, Activision having a bunch of games that they had Platinum work on. Platinum works well with Nintendo. I have no reason to see why any of the games that Platinum put on the Xbox 360 and the PS3 couldn't have been put on the Wii U, outside of the company just saying, hey, no, we don't want to put it there. And there's no viable reason that platform should have been ignored. Well, I guess at that point, when those came out, you could say, well, it's not selling well enough. But there were things that led up to it not selling well because of the lack of support coming from other companies. Yeah, sure, Nintendo can run a game console by themselves and make money on that platform by themselves, but they were trying to work well with third parties, and they had even talked with major third parties before launching the Wii U. What do you need from us? What do you want? What can we do to make things easier on you? Which is why they made the console so similar to the Xbox 360, because they wanted to make it easy to port from the 360 over to the Wii U, because the 360 was the popular platform at the time, at least for developing. It was the mainstay, with the exception of anything that was going to be unique to the Wii.
Which was not the case for World at War. However, the Wii was one of Nintendo's most successful consoles, what you seem to be doing is taking the individual failures of third-party companies when it comes to the types of games or the ways in which they ported games to the console, and using that as an anecdotal metric to measure the plans for the console. This is a bit of a logical leap. You can't take the failures of a third-party company and use it as a measuring stick for the plans of the first-party developer on the platform. You need to look at what the first-party developer was putting on the platform, the advertising they were using for the platform, and the way in which it was received and then responded to after that point.
Okay, to this point, I would say, yeah, I definitely agree that Nintendo dropped the ball with their advertising, and that was wholly on them, completely on them. I've said it back then, I say it now. When they brought out the Wii U, they should have continued the form of advertising that they went with the Wii, where they had the guys show up. And I think Koizumi was one of the ones that was in the commercial. They show up with the Wii remote and whatever game they had at the time. They bow and say, "We would like to play." They could have done the exact same thing with the Wii U. All it would have to been is, "We would like to play with you." And they could have done that. And they did do a horrible job of explaining how the Wii U worked in its first year. But that still doesn't excuse the third-party developers from dropping gimped games on hardware that was better and easier to move stuff over to. I would not give them that, because that was a choice they made. In the situation with the Wii, they didn't really have a choice because the hardware was far inferior to the 360 and the PS3. The only reason those games actually ended up on the Wii was because of how popular the Wii was. It wasn't the other way around. It wasn't because those games ended up on the Wii that the Wii became popular. The Wii became popular for its usability to people. It was the game console anyone could pick up and play because it was so easy to understand, and that made it very popular. That became a boon for it. Sort of like how the PS2 was like the cheapest DVD player at the time. It was a DVD player and a video game console. But that DVD player is largely one of the reasons it sold well, because parents could justify getting the PS2 because then they had their DVDs and they could use it without their kids, and kids could play the games on it. It was a justifiable reason. So I'm not, and maybe it seems like that, but there is no intentional conflation of the hardware not doing well, and then because third parties failed to do what they should have done on it, that's the reason that, well, them not doing what they were supposed to do, or at least them not putting their best foot forward, did play into it. I'm not making it solely on third parties. Again, this was just me strictly talking on the point of how it was basically third parties delved into it. And yeah, in a short TikTok video, you can't really explain all that unless I did like 5 or 6 different parts. Maybe I should have. That probably would have cleared up a lot of stuff and made it a lot easier to understand that I wasn't just saying, "Oh, this all hinged only on third party." But the Wii U launched with like 32, somewhere between 32 and 36 games at its launch. Many of those games were third-party games that were already on other platforms, which people complained about, even though most of those versions were enhanced versions in some way. Even with the GIMPs, they were enhanced versions in some way. And Nintendo gave a good year and a half of free space for all of the planned third-party games that were supposed to be coming up, like the Young Justice game that was supposed to come out across multiple platforms, and it was going to have a version on the Wii U as well as the Wii. Those got canceled. There was no given reason as to why they were canceled. They were canceled, and this was before the Wii U could get traction. There were a lot of cancellations of games that people were expecting and waiting on during this time frame that happened. And who do you blame for that? You can't blame Nintendo for it, because they weren't the ones that canceled the games. They didn't go to the companies and say, hey, you can't put your game on our platform. Those games were canceled. So I see where you're coming from. And it's possible that my argument could seem like that because I was talking only on the singular aspect. Again, that's why I'm doing the live stream, to do a reaction, because I can add more to it that wouldn't have been present in my original short video, which was about 3 minutes. But we will continue.
All from the first party developer. You also need to see how the first party developer is interacting with third party developers. One of the biggest issues we had on the N64 was there was a third party developer that they basically screwed over. Lots of them, because they didn't have a disc based system. As a result, a lot of RPG developers couldn't do things on the N64. The game.
I would agree with this point, and I do largely agree with it. But Nintendo does have compression techniques that they could have worked with a lot of those third parties on. Look at Resident Evil 2. Resident Evil 2 was spanned across 2 different discs at 700 megabytes apiece. They fit it all into one cartridge. I mean, yeah, you lost some things like maybe sound quality, and you lost a couple of the cutscenes, but the game was largely intact, and it even had additional content that wasn't in the original. And that was because Nintendo's teams worked with them and compressed a lot of the data and information. So, yeah, for something like Final Fantasy VII, they would have needed the disc-based system, and the Nintendo DD the N64 DD was supposed to be the answer to that. It never took off in Japan, so Nintendo didn't find it viable to move to other places. I kind of wonder what would have happened had they thought to move it to other places. But again, these are mostly understandable reasons as to why certain things happen. And also back then, Yamauchi was not the man to be played with. He gave you an opportunity, you spoiled the opportunity. He did not give you another one. I mean, he was not very forgiving, at least when it came down to Iwata. Iwata was far more forgiving of those particular things and aspects.
GameCube ran into similar issues with its similarly restrictive tiny disc format.
I disagree with that. 100% disagree with that. And I disagree with that because Lightning Returns on the Xbox 360 is 3 discs when it's 1 disc on the PS3. You can do multiple disc format games. They were being done before the GameCube, and they were being done after it. So I disagree with that point 100%.
Nintendo also had issues like this is something that goes back to like Mortal Kombat on the Super Nintendo. We got a super censored version of Mortal Kombat, and the Sega Genesis got an uncensored, even if it was graphically.
Yes, that did happen, and that was because Nintendo was touted as the family console. I understand that. I wholeheartedly understand that point, and I played Mortal Kombat on Sega, just like most people did. They didn't get it back until I think Mortal Kombat 2.
Inferior version. Those are decisions that are between the third-party developer and Nintendo, and you can trace those. If you can't put a link, though, between EA's decisions with the Wii U version of Mass Effect and Nintendo and their dealings with EA at that point, then...
As I already covered earlier, EA and Nintendo had a grand standing in EA 2011 that they were going to be working together closely on the Wii U with a lot of games. Anyone can go back and look that up. The video's there. Anyone can go back and look that up.
And this particular point won't ever actually hold water.
For no reason. You can't really use sales early on at that early of a period because all of that stuff came out well before the Wii U had a chance to hit a stride. So you couldn't use sales to justify that. So
you can, though. You don't have. So some consoles have to hit a stride in order to like functionally have a user base.
I think I already covered
PlayStation 3
this
is a good
point.
example of this. It didn't sell well in the beginning and it had a very like gatekeepy price tag. But over time, the PlayStation 3 ended up having better sales overall and better reception,
Yeah,
despite
I covered
the
this point
Xbox
already.
360 and the Wii both outselling it in the end. It still ended up making it into more homes the longer it was around. Whereas conversely, the Wii did not have to hit a stride, but the Wii sales did end up diminishing over time as the novelty of motion control wore off. Andy Pretzel also, thank you very much for the 45 bits.
The Wii U was poorly. I already covered that. Had limited power compared to the competition Xbox and PS4. I dislike that argument because the Wii U came out before the Xbox Durango and PS4. Was it Neo or was the Neo for the Pro? I think Neo was for the Pro. But before the PS4 and Xbox One were even announced, the Wii U was released. So you can't give it a. You can't say it's because it was lower powered compared to the stuff that didn't get announced until after it came out. When it came out, it was the most powerful platform on the market. And yes, storage was expandable, and hard drives did not cost that much money. Even if you want to say, well, I didn't want to have to purchase a hard drive to download games, you didn't have to download games. You could run the games right off the physical media, which is something you could not do with the Xbox One or PS4. And you can't do with the PS5 or the Xbox Series X. Any physical media you put in those platforms is just basically a key. Once you put it in there, the game will run. But you still have to have the games installed on the hardware in order to play them. That wasn't the case with the Wii U.
The Wii, I mean, this is the point that I was going to make before. The Wii U was poorly advertised and had limited power compared to the competition. Nintendo did what they could, and EA had to work with the restrictions of the system. So, I mean, this is where I could probably point this out. Let's talk about the environment that the Wii U released in. So what people wanted was a console that did not use the motion control gimmicks of the Wii and had HD capabilities and had a robust online system. The Wii U technically had all of these things. The gamepad may look gimmicky. Also, VT resuming. Thank you very much for the The gamepad may look gimmicky, but if you ever played with the Wii U gamepad, it feels as comfortable as a standard
With that, I agree.
Especially after the first, 10 minutes.
Yes, it does.
Like, as soon as you wrap your hands around that controller, it feels like it is made very properly for comfortable long-time gameplay. Some individual games, especially early on, had gimmicks with it, like the Call of Duty game we got on the Wii U shortly after that. I think Black Ops 2 had gimmicks with it, with a sniper rifle and other things. I know Batman Arkham City had gimmicks with the Wii U gamepad as well.
And they were all good.
But we run into the issue where gamers technically got what they wanted. The Wii U had a very robust online system.
See, I agree with this
did
point.
not do very well on it. Smash Brothers did not do very well on it, but other games ended up doing.
Oh, hold on, no. Smash Brothers did very well on the Wii U. It just did not have the numbers to make it line up with the other versions of Smash. That's the big problem. Just like Mario Kart 8. Mario Kart 8 sold to half of Wii U owners. 50%. That is insane for any game, especially on hardware that didn't sell very well. And that's selling better than most individual third-party games on 360, PS3, Xbox One, and PS4. So I will contend that point. I'm sorry, that one I will contend.
Doing perfectly fine on it, like Mario Kart and Monster Hunter, with very good online systems. We even had online chat rooms on there as well. But the Wii U had a weaker tri-core processor compared to the other consoles on the market.
Compared to the consoles that came out after it. And yes, I agree with that. But before then, what was the problem?
The Wii U was basically playing like a souped-up Xbox 360, while the PlayStation 4 and Xbox One were doing their powerhouse numbers instead. And yeah, I miss Miiverse too. Can we get F's in the chat for Miiverse?
Everybody misses Miiverse that had a Wii U.
I loved Miiverse. I really did. But at the end of the day, the Wii U released as an underpowered console that had the stigma of the Wii.
How do you release as an underpowered console when you were the first home console to market of a generation versus platforms that did not get announced until after your console releases? I always ask that question, and maybe after you hear and see what my points are and my rebuttal, maybe you'll have an answer for that. No one I have talked to yet has had an answer for that question. It can't be underpowered if it comes out before the other platforms are announced, before we knew any bit of information about the other two platforms. The Wii U was already on market. And yes, I do agree. It did play like a souped up Xbox 360 because that's exactly what it was supposed to be. That's what everyone asked for. And that's what everyone got. And no one wanted it, oddly enough.
Most of your casual gaming market did not want, and when I say casual gaming market, I mean your people who would regularly play games with controllers, but were not interested in the motion games of the Wii. The Wii brought in non-gamers to play games, and that is an astounding
the Wii
thing.
and the DS.
But most of your casual gaming demographic, they were on the Xbox 360 around that time. They had Wiis because it was the most ubiquitous system of the time.
Mm-hmm. Again, I agree with that.
But if you look at the Wii U, the advertising for it made it seem almost like it was an extension of the Wii. They made it seem
okay,
like...
no, I disagree with that. I disagree with that because I was paying attention to the advertising back then, and it was never that. Their advertising wasn't good, but it was never that. That came from sources like G4 and IGN back then, after they had dealt with the Wii U behind closed doors at different E3s and talking about it being a different platform. When E3 2012 rolled around, they started acting like they didn't know that it was a different piece of hardware and that it was the same as the same as the Wii. And I always questioned, how would the Wii U gamepad somehow add a bunch of power to the Wii to make it be a higher definition console and to be able to run games that it couldn't run at those resolutions at all? So that came from both IGN and G4 of the day back then, especially Adam says that was not something that they had in their advertising, because their advertising was so poor that nobody knew what it was after hearing all this confusing crap from different gaming media sources that made its way to mainstream media sources. That's what happened with that.
Oh, look at all the neat things the gamepad can do. But a lot of gamers didn't want neat things with the gamepad anymore. They just wanted a good system. A system with first-party Nintendo games usually, but a good system nonetheless. And at the end of the day, while the Wii U was that system, I still have my Wii U today. 2 of them in my house right now. The marketing for the Wii U was a cataclysmic failure.
Agreed.
The online system for the Wii U, while being very good in its own right, was not advertised in such a significant way
Agreed.
that anybody even remembered what it was. The Wii U had a better voice chat system than... Hell, the Wii had a better voice chat system than the Switch, but the Wii U had a better voice chat system
Agreed
than
there.
even the Switch has as of right now.
Mm-hmm.
Monster Hunter Tri online had voice chat in random lobbies.
Yeah.
And that's just not something you get with mostly anything on the Switch at all. Ultimately, though, I think it was Nintendo that was the biggest issue here. Do I think that it was on purpose? No, I don't think a company makes a product for the purpose of failure. And I don't think the Switch released as early as it did because they desperately wanted to get their new console out the door. I think it was more they realized they were losing so much steam with the Wii U.
Yeah. They put the Switch out.
That's just my thoughts. If you look at the gaming environment...
Hold on, I got to stop that for a second. They put the Switch out roughly 6 months earlier than what would be their normal timeline. Because their normal timeline is 4 to 6 years, roughly somewhere around 5. They gave the Wii U 4.5 years. So, yeah, the Switch came out a bit earlier. Not drastically earlier. Because chances are the Switch would have likely come out November of 2017 instead of March of 2017 had the Wii U done well. They still would have come out with that platform. They were already working on it behind the scenes. As Nintendo has always said, they immediately start working on their new platform once they release one. I don't think that's ever changed. So, yeah, I agree with most of those points. Maybe not fully the reasoning behind those points, but I do agree with those points.
Around the time the Wii U came out, it was not very healthy for Nintendo fans for the longest time. It would take us 6 to 10 months to get a game out on our console that had been out on other consoles for longer. And the types of games we would get would be either ports of games from last generation, from the PS3 and Xbox 360, or they would be somewhat scaled down versions of games from the current gen. It wasn't until the Switch that we started getting serious downscaled ports again, like we used to get with the N64. Doom on the Switch is functionally like running RE2 on the N64. It's a game that people didn't think could be ran on the hardware, and yet it can be done. But
I think that's mostly because people assume that just because hardware is not as powerful, that because for some reason that's what everybody's been told, but they assume that because hardware is not as powerful that certain things can't be done with it. And it's arguable that it can be done because most of today's okay, little man, I got you. Most of today's video games are run in engines that are highly scalable. Because if you look at the tech specs for even I want to say Unreal Engine 4, the system requirements for Unreal Engine 4 literally place it outside of the range of the Nintendo Switch. But there are Unreal Engine 4 games running on the Switch because this engine is scalable. People tend to forget that.
I guess I'm getting in the weeds. My biggest point is that I don't think Nintendo did that on purpose. I think they just made a lot of mistakes.
Yes,
they
thought
did. They could bring the Wii crowd in to play the Wii U.
Yes, they did assume that.
The Wii U functionally was what a gamer, a standard like casual or even a hardcore gamer would want. But there's a lot of things that were barring its way. The gamepad costed $100, and whether or not you needed...
People complain about the price of the gamepad, but no one complains about the price of the Elite controllers for the Xbox One. And functionally, the gamepad does more. Just a point that needs to be made.
Multiple gamepads, or you would be allowed to use other controllers, was not very well communicated. Nintendo...
I blame that one on gaming media, because a lot of them acted as if the gamepad was the only controller you would actually be able to use with the Wii U. Again, there are sources you can find it at within IGN, and I think they really just mass deleted a lot of their Wii U stuff. But IGN and G4 back in the day kind of pushed that stigma.
Really did not know how to market that system.
No, they did not.
It feels like a system trapped between two audiences, trapped between two generations of gaming, and trapped between two types of gamer.
I can agree with those things. At this point, you're looking at the companies intentionally crippling one version of the game for no reason.
So, if we're talking about Mass Effect 3, we're back on this one again. I don't know if I would say EA intentionally crippled for no reason. It could be sales figures. Like, actually, I am curious here.
You can't include sales figures in the early life of the console, because then no one would have bought stuff for PS3. There would have been no reason to put games on PS3 because it had a very similar situation in its early life. So I gotta reject that reason based on that.
Let me look up real quick. Sales figures for Mass Effect 3 Wii U.
And this would be post-mortem, and that would also not be reflective of what it was at the time.
Let's take a look here at VG charts. Let's see what we can find. Sales history.
And they literally didn't even put the game in Japan, which is also a problem.
That is not a lot. It did not sell well here at all.
Post-mortem. It's easier to say that.
Like, let's compare that to Let's do Mass Effect 3
on the 360, which is the best platform it's sold on.
Let's do a comparison. Let's look at the Xbox 360 version of the game instead. Look at that difference.
Yes.
Look at that difference. The Xbox 360 version of Mass Effect 3 sold millions, 3.4 million units. The Wii.
Oddly enough, I knew that's exactly where you were going to go, because that would be the same thing I would say if I were arguing against me, because that is the strongest point to be made. But even the PS3 version sold more. I know that these things sold better post-mortem. Everyone knows this. So again, during the time frame, you couldn't use that. You can use it afterwards because the information is there. During the time frame, that information would not have been available. That was my point. During that time frame, that information would not have been available. There would be no way to determine how well it was going to sell on the Wii U before it came out on the Wii U. So why cripple it before it comes out? That was the point I was making. And that happened a lot with games that were in the early life of the Wii U. Not all of them, but a lot of them.
Wii U version couldn't even crack 500,000. This isn't intentionally crippling a game for the purpose of crippling a console. This is reallocating resources away from a console where your install base is so microscopic that the
I did
gains
not expect
are
that I was going to be
minimal.
going this long either.
And of course, an argument can be made that these numbers are as low as they are because the first two Mass Effects were not available on the system. But as a comparison, let's go and look at Mass Effect 2 PS3 VG charts. Mass Effect 1 wasn't available. So what are the sales for Mass Effect 2? We have 1.46 million for Mass Effect 2.
No, VG charts isn't a good
compared
source if you
to
want total numbers, but it is good for
to
physical.
VG charts, Xbox 360. Compared to 3. Okay, so they got 1.5 million on the PS3, but that is still larger. It's worth it to invest in this install base. This install base cares about your stuff.
But again, most of this is post-mortem.
This install
so
base cares about your stuff.
Defeats the purpose of what I was saying.
This install
this
base
is post-mortem argument.
does not care about your game. Said how many Nintendo fans are also Mass Effect fans? I don't have a way to get numbers for that. All I can do is pull up the individual sales for the individual games. While I don't agree with a company abandoning a particular console's release for a game, from a business perspective, it does make sense. And I hate that it makes sense.
Again, as I'm going to say, because I understand what these arguments, how he's presenting the arguments, and post-mortem, these make perfect sense. They make perfect sense post-mortem. But before the game releases on the platform, how do they make sense? That's where the issue is. That's where my issue is. Because a lot of these consoles, a lot of the Wii versions of games were gimped before there was even a chance to see how well they would do. It'd be different if, say, let's just say theoretically, all three versions of Mass Effect released at the exact same time. All three versions of Mass Effect 3 released at the exact same time. And then the Wii U version didn't do well. And they decided, because it didn't do well, having released at the same time as others and not being a late release after the other ones and then being gimped on top of that, that it made no sense for them to put the DLC and stuff on there. I would agree with that notion. I would agree with it 100%. But when one, this version of the game was a later release, and then two, right after that, Mass Effect Trilogy released on both the other platforms, as well as Origin on PC, when you include that, and then look at the fact that they did not add in, like, just put it this way. The I think it was the Omega DLC for Mass Effect 3 released like a week and a half after Mass Effect 3 Special Edition on the Wii U. What was the reason for not putting it on there? It literally released right around the same time the Mass Effect trilogy released for the PS3 and Xbox 360. So what would have been the logical reason during that time frame to skip the Wii U for at least that DLC? It was either the Omega or the Leviathan. I don't remember which. But what would have been the logical reason for that at that point? Because the install base was fresh. The console had just started selling. And I think it had only just reached like 1 million units at that point. So again, a lot of this is post-mortem. When you look at it post-mortem, it makes a hell of a lot of sense. But before then, you can't determine that. You can't determine what post-mortem is going to look like before post-mortem happens. So I hope that this makes more sense with what I'm saying. And at some point that you can actually listen to what I'm saying. And then we could probably even do a discussion together where we counter our points with each other.
But I think that is the issue. That is the reason you're looking for, more so than to cripple the Wii U.
Sure, the Wii U version of that game had some features that were nice to be able to use to actually enhance the gameplay of that game. But at the same time, there was so much taken from it. You get an understanding as to why people didn't run to those versions of those games outside of people that just unnecessarily disliked the platform because it wasn't the name brand that they liked.
And I do agree there is a propensity in gaming culture in general to gravitate towards the platform that you prefer, and it does cause almost a type of xenophobia to platforms that you don't have.
I agree with that.
Like here we have an Xbox One that Raz like brought to the house. We have 2 Wii U's, we've got a Switch. The one thing we don't have any PlayStation consoles here. Not because I don't like PlayStation, but just we haven't had a reason to get them. We have gaming PCs.
Yeah, I
Our
agree with you.
primary gaming platform is on PC. But I do remember the console wars when I was in high school, and I imagine they are still quite as fervent today as they ever have been.
A lot of
were I
people
to
are.
step back into a similar demographic.
A lot of people legitimately are.
But again, I think this comes down to having a smaller install base.
The smaller install base couldn't
The
have been
game
an issue
doesn't
at
get
the time.
crippled because the game isn't good. The game doesn't get crippled because the console needs to be killed. The game is crippled as a terrible result of both not having an install base on the platform and not having a way of establishing that base. Like the Wii U didn't have
that
Mass Effect
stop
1
of me
and 2.
looks bad.
Most people would not be buying Mass Effect 3 on the Wii U because they could not carry over their characters from Mass Effect 1 and 2.
Yep.
And that was one of the big gimmicks of the Mass Effect series, was being able to carry over your character through each and every game. So you had one complete story with your version of Commander Shepard.
Yeah, I agree with that.
The only way you got to have a semblance of that in Mass Effect 3, if you were playing on the Wii U, was there was about a 10-minute long comic segment
I hated
that
that
gave you
thing.
multiple choice questions so that you could kind of build your Commander Shepard based on a loose comic version of the story.
Before you finish that point in the video, I hated that because once I found it, and mostly because that was my first experience with Mass Effect, and it was on the suggestion of another person that I got it. But doing that in the moment when I didn't know anything about the series, I was like, okay, this is cool, it's interesting. But then when I got to play the other games on a different platform, and I realized I lost so much context of stuff. And there's so much stuff that you don't get to do, and little intricacies that play themselves out into the rest of the story that I look back on it and I'm irritated. But in the moment, I was like, okay, this is a cool little thing where I can just throw this character together. But then when I think about it, and to the point that you're making, okay, little boy, I got you. And to the point that you're making, I do agree that that would have been a reason that people didn't hop over to the Wii U version of the game, because there would be a lot of inconsistencies. It's the same issue that I have currently with Dragon Age, because if, say, you played Dragon Age Origins and then played Dragon Age 2 on your 360, and you ended up with an Xbox One and got Inquisition, you have to go to the little online setup that they have to try to rebuild your character. But unfortunately, certain actions can't be done with that builder, because in it, like, say your character did two things in there that contradict each other in that builder. You can't translate that. So you have to do the best you can, unless you had Dragon Age Inquisition on the 360 and then transferred your save data over to the Xbox One, which makes it a long-winded workaround. So I do agree with you there.
Presented to you. There's like a loose comic of Mass Effect 1 and 2 events to see, like, how would you have responded to these things? Okay, that's your Shepard. Was it a good thing? No, not necessarily. It was an okay compromise for a game that recognized that the first two games would never be on its platform. But is that evidence that they tried to intentionally cripple a platform? I really don't think so.
So, looking back and having hindsight to that, you could really say that the companies were spending their time actually trying to cripple this console specifically. And that's why so many people now are asking for ports of the games that Nintendo made on the Wii U to go over to the Switch, because a lot of people just didn't get it based on a lot of the stuff that was said through gaming media and the gaming press, as well as companies in the gaming industry trying to crap all over this particular platform, even though there really was no reason to do that.
So I do agree there was no good reason to crap over the Wii U. The Wii U was an amazing console in its own right, but it did suffer from limitations. You got to understand, as a comparison, the PlayStation 4 and the Xbox One at the time that the Wii U was in its heyday were running stronger octa-core processors. This severely limited the kind of games that could be ran on the Wii U with its weaker tri-core processor. At the end of the day, if the console is less powerful, it is harder to develop games for it if you are trying.
I would agree with this point if there weren't developers who put work into moving games from the 360 or PS3 over to the Wii. And I would also agree with this point is within that time frame, which was like the first 3 to 4 years of the Wii U, first 2.5 years of the Wii U, PS3 and Xbox 360 were still getting the same games that the Xbox One and PS4 were getting. And the Wii U was clearly the more technically superior machine compared to the 360 and PS3. So if the PS3 and 360 can get games that are also going over to the PS4 and Xbox One, why couldn't the Wii U get those games too? And again, a lot of that happened before there was a chance for the Wii U to hit a stride. So I agree with your arguments for post-mortem and looking back at it. Yes, I do agree with that. If you look at just the numbers post-mortem and you don't have any other context, like you didn't experience it, then yes, it makes complete 100% sense. But if you were into the gaming media and the gaming sphere back then, especially majorly, you would probably understand exactly what I'm talking about. So it's, again, I think that sits and rests solely on the third parties, what they did. Now, again, the Wii U was not the best marketed platform, and I'm never going to say it was. I always chide Nintendo for how badly they marketed that platform. And then a year and a half into it, they decided that we're going to do a full video telling you exactly how it works and what you can use with it. That was a major problem on their front. But if, as you said, knowing that Mass Effect couldn't be like, and they weren't doing any sort of save transfer or anything like that where you could import your saves from a different platform, because that probably would have helped. It helped with Grand Theft Auto. Again, a lot of games that could have been on the Wii U and probably would have been system sellers because of the additional features of the gamepad, at least for the people that would have been interested. I'm not saying that would have made the Wii U sell gangbusters and it would have done exponentially better, but it probably could have sold at least twice as many units as it did. And for Nintendo, that likely would have been a success in their book. Now, where the Wii U was successful is it did sell the software that came out on it. People did buy games as they came out on the Wii U. It still had a 6-to-1 attachment rate, and that's not bad. But looking back at the PS4 and Xbox One coming out after the Wii U, they weren't even announced until after the Wii U came out. They were announced like 4 months after the Wii U released. Some like 4 or 5 months after the Wii U released, if I remember correctly. Because I believe that the Xbox One was announced and then the PS4 was announced. I mean, I may have the order messed up, but it wasn't too far apart from each other. And then we got the infamous E3 where Don Matrick said, just deal with it, about not being able to share and trade your games on the Xbox One, or not being able to take used games, sell used games, and bring used games over to the Xbox One because of how that was coded. And then Sony deciding that they were going to take an hour to remove some stuff from the PS4 before they presented it. Because if people remember correctly, the PS4 was supposed to come with a camera very similar to how the Kinect worked for the Xbox One. And the Kinect and Microsoft's whole massive DRM thing were unpopular with people back then. Those were not issues that the Wii U had. The Wii U's biggest issue was popularity. Like, if we were to boil things down to brass tacks, it was popularity. It didn't catch on the same way as the Wii did. And that's what Nintendo expected it to. And they expected people to understand that this was a different system completely. And their messaging wasn't great. But if you can agree with me that companies shouldn't have shit all over the product, then wouldn't that lend some credence to what I just was saying? That kind of would. Because that would make sense. If they're shitting on it and everybody's following the popularity trend of shitting on it, then that would mean that there was a discrepancy in the industry and people were trying to sabotage it in some way. There were developers who didn't even touch the system, crapping on it, and then later coming out and apologizing for it. So again, it's something to think about. Yeah, post-mortem, those numbers make a lot of sense. In the moment, some of them don't.
Trying to develop ported games. You can develop bespoke games for a console of any power, and you will just work within the limitations of that console. But if you have a game that physically cannot run on that console, sometimes the effort of downscaling that game will not translate into money for it. And if you want an example of that effort not translating into money, I mean, we have the sales of Mass Effect 3. Granted, there are other factors there involved, of course. I mean, again, it's the third game in the series. It's very hard to argue you should get this one when you're not going to be able to carry over Shepard. But at the end of the day, I've said the end of the day a bunch. I'm kind of dumb.
Yeah,
but
we both do that.
it was a weaker system. It was scaled to be slightly stronger than the 360 and PS3. And while it could handle some amazing games that looked astounding and ran incredibly well, and even some that didn't run well but were still astounding. I mean, hell, Breath of the Wild is on the system. I don't think it's the third-party developers trying to cripple the Wii U, nor Nintendo trying to cripple the Wii U. Nintendo has a really weird way of doing things when it comes to tech. Their standards are take old tech and find better ways of understanding that old tech rather than relying on new tech. This is the reason why the Wii is literally two GameCubes sandwiched together.
But that's exactly what Apple does with all of its technology, and everybody loves Apple. Just for example.
This is the reason why the Wii U is powered like an Xbox 360. This is the reason why the Switch runs still weaker than an Xbox One and a PS4, and we are a generation ahead of that now. Nintendo takes old hardware and tries to make it better.
I agree with
Microsoft
that.
and Sony try to use new hardware to push the boundaries of the gaming space. They market to two separate types of people. They market to two separate audiences. Whether or not this is good for people individually as gamers, that's a question for history. But at the end, goddamn, I need to stop saying at the end of the day. But the thing is, if a third party wants to cripple a platform, they don't release a gimped version of their game and literally lose money just for the purpose of screwing Nintendo. They just don't port their game to the console.
That would be the smarter way to do it. But during this time frame, there was also a lot of media going about making Nintendo be a third-party developer. And if I remember correctly, there was a developer who said that they did not want to get Nintendo consoles to play Nintendo games, for example.
That's what they do. They just go, hey, this game could be good on this console, but we don't like the developer of that console. So they opt not to port it over. The reason that people are so happy about getting Wii U ports on the Switch is not that they are now suddenly realizing just how good a console the Wii U was, even though I agree it was. I think it's more that they're glad that games that were previously on a dead console are coming over to something that they and others will actually play. It was less their excitement about the console and more their excitement about the games.
Oh, hold on. I didn't see this. Nintendo tried the Power Race. The GameCube was arguably the strongest system in the Xbox, GameCube, PS2. And between the Xbox and the GameCube, it was its worst system at the time. So they decided to go back to old tech they could do interesting things with. I would agree with that mostly. Because they still use the same processors and stuff for the Wii that they used for the GameCube. I think they were just better versions of them. But yeah, I can agree with that one.
I
From
don't
Tinky Shonen.
wish any like ill will on the creator of this video. His name is the Game Idea Guy. In fact, actually, because these are interesting ideas to talk about, I would like you guys to go and sub over to his channel.
Thank you.
I do think this is a conversation that
I agree. It's a conversation that needs to be kind of had, and I would be willing to discuss it with you.
be willing to have again at some point about another topic. And if you guys enjoy this kind of content, like I'm experimenting a little bit on Necosaurus. I don't know if I want to focus on video response stuff. I don't know if I want to focus on Magic the Gathering stuff. I don't know if I
Okay,
want
so
to.
that's basically their ending for that. So I'll stop sharing that portion. But I think I said what I said, and yeah, maybe because that was extremely long reaction for a 3-minute video. So my reaction to that reaction had to be longer. But yeah, it's I think a lot of the arguments that was made by Cirrus there was mostly stuff that was post-mortem. And I get why they would disagree with me when you look at things post-mortem. If you look at it again in the moment, a lot of that stuff does not make sense in the moment. And yeah, thank you, Jay. It was THQ, that's the developer from THQ that said that. Looking at it post-mortem, it makes way more sense now than it did back then, because you can look at the numbers, at everything afterwards, and be like, yeah, of course it makes sense that they didn't do that. But you look at what game was it? The Crew? It was The Crew that Ubisoft was putting out. And they put it on the 360 and not the PS3, but it was on the Xbox One and PS4. And they said the 360 was the console that was most like next gen. How similar is the 360 to the Xbox One and PS4? Because from what I could tell, there are no similarities. Because if that was the case, then it would be easy to move stuff from over from the Xbox One and PS4 over to the Wii U, and there would be no argument or problem with it. It wouldn't have cost that much money. And even back then, I think what was it that Ubisoft had quoted? It was $100,000 to port a game to the Wii U. $100,000. That's extremely cheap for how much it costs for them to develop those games. $100,000. So yeah, I do actually think though that he did have some very strong points, but I just think the strong points were from a postmortem perspective. Because from a postmortem perspective, like I said, like once you have all the data in front of you, it makes the most sense. But when you don't have that data in front of you, it makes literally no sense. You can't go into a fresh console and say, well, now it makes sense to give gimped out versions of games. And yeah, maybe EA only released those games because they had already priorly made promise to release many of those games. That's probably why. It's probably why a lot of games that ended up gimped versions of what they were on the Wii U versus other platforms happened, was because those promises and contracts were already signed. They couldn't fully back out of everything. At least that would be my take on it. A lot of those contracts were signed well before the controversy started taking place. And so once those contracts were signed and things were already set up, and you got companies that would show literal commercials would say, hey, we have this game on the 360, PS3, Xbox One, and PS4. And the game was also coming to the Wii U, but it was not shown. That's third parties advertising there. That Nintendo has no control over that. So it would be a discussion. And I would hope that if Sirius would like to, I would be up for us actually having that back and forth and doing a full discussion over that generation, because it would be interesting for one, and two, I could see it being a lot of fun. I think we could juxtapose a lot of our ideas off of each other, and maybe it would be interesting to go with. But outside of that, I think I am done. If anybody has any sort of additional things they would like to say, I'm up for hearing it. Thank you for Jay and Trinell for jumping into the chat, and for the other people that popped in and out and were listening in. Thank you guys very much. Also, awesome, Eric. I missed you there. Thanks everybody for being a part of the discussion. Wayne It podcast in like an hour and a half. If you guys are still interested in hearing more talk, we got a lot of interesting stuff to go over. Again, over on Jay's channel. So go check that out. I will be sharing links to my YouTube as well as my Twitter as soon as they are available. Otherwise, thank you guys very much for listening in. Keep your eyes and ears out for more stuff from me. And until the next time, enjoy your games and